Have you ever heard of rewilding? Even if you have, we're going to try and explain it in a little bit more depth here. It is the act of bringing back species that have long disappeared from certain areas. How exactly does it work? Well, stay tuned to Roundtable. And a very warm welcome to the programme from me, David Foster. It's being practised in large parts of Europe, the US, even Asia. Now the UK is looking into a new rewilding project that aims to raise awareness about endangered trees and animals, ecosystems in their entirety. Just how feasible is it all?
Rewilding is a way to restore ecosystems by supporting landscapes and habitats and allowing wildlife to flourish. In some instances, it even reintroduces species of animals. It's been practiced around the world, bringing back Siberian tigers to South Korea, for instance, and grey wolves to the United States. Holland and Romania successfully reintroduced bison, a species that had been extinct in the region for centuries. In the UK, improvements to the soil and landscape helped to increase beaver populations. Advocates of rewilding say it's good for the environment and cuts carbon emissions. But some farmers say these projects threaten their livelihoods and the communities around them.
OK, let's get talking. You can see there in Bristol, we have Grainne McCabe, just back from Papua New Guinea, in fact, Head of Field Conservation and Science at the Bristol Zoological Society. They're putting bears, wolves, wolverines and other animals together. We'll see how that's going. At the Roundtable, Louise Manning, Professor of Agri-Food and Supply Chain Security at the Royal Agricultural University, also happens to be a farmer. Paul Jepson with us, Nature Recovery Lead at the eco-consultancy Ecosulis, and Kim Reuter, a biologist and environmental policy expert. Massive titles, it's quite a mouthful, so let's actually get down to the substance of all of this. And Kim, let me ask you, it was fun, wasn't it, before the programme? You said if you Google rewilding, you get some extraordinary results, such as?
Yeah, when you Google it, you get things like elephants in Brazil and sort of these crazy worst-case scenarios that are dystopian futuresque. And that's not what rewilding always is.
And it isn't like that, is
yeah,
it?
No.
Go on, tell us what it actually is.
So rewilding is a process of letting land become more natural towards its natural state. And that can include the reintroduction of animals that used to be there, both passively and actively.
Grainne, why would you, and this is your project you've got at Bristol Zoo, why would you want to put bears and wolves together and see how they interact, perhaps also with lynx and wolverines? Why would you when it doesn't happen in nature any longer?
Well, partly because I think those processes used to happen, and that used to manage the woodland more naturally. So now, because we don't have those species, we're having to actively manage these environments, and that has a cost that comes with it. And it requires quite a lot of time and resources. So if you're able to do that naturally, it's much better, and it has a knock-on effect to the rest of the ecosystem.
OK, I'll ask you how it's working in just a moment, then we'll talk about Papua New Guinea, but let's bring it back to the table here. It helps manage woodland. Now, that's fascinating, because some people might think it's just almost a vanity project to say, look, we can put wolves into parts of Great Britain, we can put bears into parts of Great Britain. But what is it that they do that is so useful?
So I think it's useful remembering, now we have such a better understanding of the long-term ecology of our planet. We now know that a lot of vegetation, in particular grasslands and herbivores, they co-evolve together. And the interactions created extraordinarily rich ecosystems. And over the years, we've wiped out a lot of the large mammals, and we've structured these ecosystems. So really, rewilding is about restoring those interconnections. Yeah. And because we haven't had this for so long, out of that, we hope, and it does happen, we get these very rich, abundant ecosystems. And it's not only about the interconnections between herbivores and different types of herbivores and vegetation, but it's actually restoring the dynamics of landscape, which all work together and sort of create this 3D version of the world, a 3D version which we've sort of lost over the centuries.
So with Rewilding Europe, which is one of the projects you were involved with, how does it work? What's gone on so far?
Well, a lot of things have gone on. I mean, there's some big dynamics going on in Europe. So, for instance, in Eastern Europe, traditional forms of pasturing or herding are dying out and people are leaving the landscapes. That means that the trees come back in and we lose these beautiful scenic landscapes rich in, wildflower meadows. So a lot of the work there is saying, well, if we're not going to do herding anymore because it's economically unviable, let's restore natural herds of herbivores, and then they'll restore then in will come the wolves and so forth around it. And we can get new recreational landscapes, so we can shift from an agricultural economy, which doesn't quite work in marginal land anymore, Louise will know more about this than I, to a more recreation-based, nature-based.
See, I was going to come to Louise because not only are you a professor at UK's leading agricultural college, but you happen to be a farm in your family. And there are concerns about this, aren't there, of reintroducing species that are dangerous either to the animals or perhaps to humans?
I think there's a concern because, as we were saying, it's always at the one extreme of what rewilding is. And we held a conference at the university about rewilding for this very reason, to actually start to say, well, what is it? What does it look like? How does it feel for farmers? Because we've talked about landscapes where farmers currently don't exist. They are landscapes that are not managed by farmers. And we, in some countries such as the UK, have a largely managed landscape, and farmers do that. So they're...
and we're a small country, so if you
Yes.
introduce bears and wolves, I think you're not. You're shaking your head as if I shouldn't be saying that. Perhaps. Or maybe I've
Well,
got
I'll give
but
you...
isn't that
yes.
going to be controversial?
I'll give you an example. We had a Romanian looking after our sheep with us because he wanted to work in the UK so he could then go back and buy his own farm in Romania, and with his hard work he did. And the first thing he said to us was, I really like working with the sheep in the UK because I don't have to worry about wolves.
And you said maybe you will have to next week.
Well, I didn't go that far, but what I'm saying is that how we farm right now is very detached from some of the extreme discussions on rewilding. That doesn't mean that farmers aren't developing ecosystems on their farms. My own farm, we're in something called the higher level scheme. So we have been paid over 10 years to look at parts of our farm, to look at how we can both produce food, but also make space for caring for wildlife and diversity.
And you're in Herefordshire.
In Herefordshire.
Listen, at any time any one of you wants to say anything and add to the conversation, don't wait for me to ask a question, because I know you're all itching to sort of get your bit in. But Kim, this is, and anybody, this is not just about animals, it's not just about vegetation, it's about entire ecosystems, am I right?
Yeah, so I think everybody here is aware of the biodiversity crisis that the world is facing, Europe's facing, England's facing. I mean, insect populations have crashed, and we know this. One of the longest term studies on insects is in the UK, in Scotland and in England. And so that's a result of ecosystems breaking down, which is, I think, what you were talking about, this idea that in some places they've become so managed that we have this breakdown of normal interactions, and that affects humans. I mean, humans need nature to thrive. We need ecosystem services. We need flood control, water, carbon storage, even clean air. And I think the rewilding discussion, it's so easy to take it to the extreme, but really I think it's just a tool in a toolbox of different techniques that we can use to address what is a real and salient issue. In the fact that we need to make sure our natural capital is protected. So
let's go to I don't mean to interrupt you, because I just said please say anything you want to at any time, but I do want to bring Grainne back in at this point, because I'd like you to tell us exactly what it is that's happening at Bristol Zoo, so people can get a picture. And then we'll talk about Papua New Guinea after that.
Okay. So up at our sister site, which is called the Wild Place Project, just north of Bristol, we have just opened 2 weeks ago an exhibit called Bearwood. And it's 4 different species. So the bears, the wolves, lynx, and wolverine. They are in enclosures, although they're quite large enclosures. So it sits over 7.5 acres. And these species are in a woodland environment, and it appears very natural when you come through because the enclosures have actually been built within the woodland. So you can walk through and actually see the bears enjoying the trees. They love climbing the trees. They're using the natural water features that are in the area, and it allows us to showcase to the public why woodland in particular is so important and what it would have looked like back in time when these species were there.
Am I right in thinking that right now you don't have the bears and the wolves exactly next to each other? They are, as you say, in separate enclosures, but you are planning to do this and thereby sort of experimenting with what could happen if these were actually happening, these cases in the wild.
That's right. So it will be a mixed species exhibit, but the wolves can move to their own paddock to get away from the bears if they wish to. So they have free movement, but they will have a shared space within the woodland. Yeah.
And what exactly, other than showing the public what it looks like, what do you hope to learn perhaps about the animals and their interaction?
So a couple of different things. I should say that we have a very strong native species conservation department here within the zoo, and I have a team of UK conservation officers who undertake regular surveys of the ground flora and the invertebrates and the mammals and actually all level of taxa within the woodland. And we're using this introduction of this new exhibit as a bit of an experiment, a bit of a microcosm to show what the impact will be on the introduction of these animals. So we'll be able to see, obviously, the animals interacting with each other, but we're much more interested in how having these animals in the woodland affects the woodland as an ecosystem. And we're going to compare that to the parts of the woodland that we have on our property that are not being developed. And we're doing that over a long-term plan, so 10, 20 years of monitoring to actually see how does the introduction of these species, as it might have done in the wild, although keeping in mind that it's just a small enclosure where the animals can't actually move outside of it, what impact they have. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how having those species there might change the way the woodland develops.
It'll be fascinating, and if we're still sitting at this table in 10, 20 years' time, you come back and tell us how it's gone. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Paul.
No, not at all. I was just going to make a connection between the discussion about farmers and ecosystems. So for me, in the UK context, rewilding's a lot about thinking about or designing a new and more natural land economy. So a lot of how we think about land in the UK goes back to the Second World War, when food security and agricultural production was the main thing. You know, as we know, we want more and we need more from our land. And I think there's this realization that the restoration, the recovery of nature, the recovery of, herds of herbivores, free roaming herbivores, that can really generate a lot of the forms of value we're now looking for from our land. Now,
sorry, just for the ignorant me here,
sure.
Help me with that. How can free-ranging herbivores such as deers or whatever, how are they going to benefit me in terms of my food security?
So they're not going to benefit you in terms of your food security, but your food security isn't just delivered within the UK. Food systems are now international there. Where it could benefit us is by producing sort of more premium products, such as wild meat. We now have the technology, to herd in much more expansive ways. But it'll produce other benefits, such as restoring our soil fertility. So interestingly, when we think about food security, we don't have much food security in a sense, because our soil is so, if you like, hammered that you have to put constant fertilizers in it. A natural grazing system will restore our soil fertility and actually create resilience in the system.
And as a professor of agriculture, you must understand this argument. Does it hold water in terms of the way this country is in the 21st century, with a lot of people moving to cities away from rural areas? We have to bring food in from other countries. Does this make economic sense, or is it simply environmental and rather nice?
Some people would suggest that. I think we also have to recognise that food security is not assured in this country. And there are millions of children over summer holidays that are not having their main meal of the day because they're not at school.
But I don't see
So
how
I think we have to have this discussion in that context.
But do you see what I'm driving at? I don't really understand why bringing in, let's say, wolves or wild boar or allowing more pasture land to be taken over by free-roaming animals. I don't really see, Louise, and I know you want to say something, Paul, but I don't really see how that's going to help children who don't get a proper meal during the day.
I think it takes the policy initiative away from food security in this country, and that we need to develop our discussions around how we manage our environment and our wider environment within the context that in many areas we have ever increasing numbers of food banks. Now, one of the challenges for farmers is if I'm going to invest in my soil, I'm going to put my cash in today and I'm going to change my practices, and I won't see a benefit from that for a very, very long time. And it's what I would call generational investment. It may be the next generation that farms that farm that actually reaps the reward. In the cost structures of food production and food supply, that generational investment is not currently met. Putting our cash into the soil today is not met. The challenge then becomes, how do we meet that cost? Should it be met by subsidies? Should it be met by developing assurance standards on food so the consumer pays for that investment in soil, in wildlife, in biodiversity? And
I'm going to ask a question in a minute, which is about how does this fit into the 21st century, other than with food banks, etc., etc. Perhaps we've gone too far, but I know you wanted to say something, Paul. Then I'll come to you, Grainne, because I don't want to leave you out on a limb down in Bristol.
Maybe just say two things. First of all, I don't think any of this is either or. I think what we really need in this country, in the UK, is to invest in nature and land, in sort of innovation areas. We invest in technological innovation areas, enterprise innovation zones. We need to be innovating and have these experimental areas where we can think about new systems and new policies. I totally take your point that there's trade-offs with this. We wouldn't switch from one system to the other. I totally take the point that you need transition finance to do this. But actually, there's such an exciting opportunity to reset our ambitions about the land and nature which we want.
Do you think this could help? I know you're itching
like
to say
waiting.
something. Do you think this could really help with something which is becoming a big issue, particularly among young people, and that is the changing nature of the global climate?
Yeah, of course. So I have a few things that I wanted to say. First,
You'll have to wait a minute, Grainne, sorry.
this link between food security in disadvantaged communities in the UK and rewilding. I think if we take it a bit bigger issue, this rewilding isn't just about having herbivores running around all over the place and maybe running into London or whatever. It's about building continuous pockets of nature that connect what are now very disconnected ecosystems so that you can have pollination services, you can have bats, that you can have insects. This is extremely valuable to the agricultural sector in the UK. In the absence of functioning ecosystems, you have increased pesticide use. You have to, you have this thing in the United States now where people are moving like beehives around so that orchards can get pollination. That's ridiculous. It's so much more expensive than investing in nature. And so while the link between, as you put it, is maybe, it's a bit, there are many more chains in that link, there is a link there. And then in terms of the scale issue, I do think it's important, it is really important to think about farming communities at the farm and at the local community level. But I think one thing that the UK government has started doing is looking at this at regional and national level. So it's not as simple as just saying all the farm that's not productive, we're just going to make it wild again. They have these things called natural capital accounts where they're starting to put a value on nature, and it's complete, I mean, it is imperfect, but it's shown us that in 2015, nature's assets to the UK was £700 billion.
Okay, but I'm concerned, and we'll come to this one with you, Grainne, if we may, about an increasing world population and how if you sort of turn land back to nature, we need to feed an awful lot more people. But you've just been to Papua New Guinea, and many years ago I was in Borneo, and they were concerned about the palm oil plantations taking away rainforest land from the, among other things, the orangutan. Therefore, that was a major concern. But you've seen something that you believe with palm oil and the deforestation is sustainable, and perhaps all this fits together.
Yeah, so what they're doing in Papua New Guinea, at least in the area where we were in West New Britain, is running a certified sustainable palm oil plantation. So it's certified by the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, the RSPO. And the practices, the certification level has zero deforestation, so they can't be cutting down any new forests. They're also just achieving a higher level of certification, which has to do with high carbon stock, which actually means that at this stage, they're not able to expand the palm oil plantations any further and cut down any more forest. So those sorts of certification levels can help where you still have high yield products being grown for a growing food market, but in a way that doesn't impact on the environment in the same way that what we're seeing in lots of parts of Borneo, for example, is unsustainable production. And those sorts of certification levels are now coming into practice for things like soy as well, which has obviously a very high deforestation impact as well. So we need to be thinking more along the lines of how we manage these sorts of food production systems.
We did something on the roundtable for palm oil here at TRT World, and I remember asking the guy whether in fact this was just a PR move or whether it was because they had a conscience. And it was a bit of both, I think, in many ways. So they've actually sort of got the most out of it that they can. But my real question here is, how 21st century is this? I mean, how are we going to see this not only acceptable on a social level, because you don't want your sheep getting eaten by wolves, clearly, but how acceptable is it in terms of, oh, we'll do something nice for nature, but at the same time, hang on, this isn't 21st century. We need to think of other ways of feeding people. Yeah, anybody?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's clear we need a systems change. That's clear. We have food security issues, we have climate change issues. The protests show us that much. We know that 1/3 of our, we could reach our emissions reduction targets. 1/3 of that is through nature, through planting trees. And so rewilding and restoration of nature, I think, is part of that solution. But the Sustainable Development Goals show us that we can't just do it in silos. And so I really am interested in your perspective on how do we do that in a way that...
I was just going to throw this one in before you say something, Louise. Talking of forests, Spain's forests are growing by 2.2 million hectares a year because people are moving to cities. So it's not so unfeasible, is it?
So I think this question about whether rewilding is fit for the 21st century, I'll say absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things it can help us do, this is something we call nature-based solutions, where we're in this period of accelerated social environmental change, and we need to be creative about solutions for that. And rewilding is really central to this innovation. I'll give you a couple of examples there. So you mentioned Spain. One of the things with Spain and climate change, it's getting drier in the centre of Iberia. We're getting really bad wildfires there. The management of wildfires and the cost for property is serious if you live in these areas. Rewilding, the rebuilding of these ecosystems of grazing vegetation interactions, reduces biomass and reduces intensity of fires. There we go.
But equally, if you have more trees, you're going to have bigger fires.
Exactly. So actually, that interaction with your herbivores and vegetation, it keeps more open habitats.
And in Spain, let me just add this one in. I'm not because I'm an expert, because I wrote it down. The forest area has trebled in Spain since the year 1900. Now, that's counterintuitive to me, isn't it?
Well, maybe not really, because it all depends on we're talking about interactions all the time here. So, you know, as I say, maybe the decline of traditional shepherding and pastoralism, you know, and so forth. The other area where rewilding is really having a big impact is in what we call living rivers. So again, we have structured and engineered our rivers in Britain and across Europe. You know, we have a big situation at the moment in Whaley Bridge on this.
North of England.
So with climate change, we're getting big flood pulses coming down, and our engineering can't handle it anymore. Or to handle it, it would cost enormous amounts of money. Insurance is going up. When we take out the engineering and rewild the rivers and get those dynamics going again, then it can deal with flood pulses much better.
We only have a couple of minutes. Louise, are you going to feel as excited about it all when half of your sheep population perhaps is killed?
Well, I don't think it'll be that extreme. But what I think it shows is that at the moment, the discussion is very much in different groups. Ecologists talk to each other. People with a very strong environmental knowledge and background talk to each other. What doesn't happen is that everyone comes together. So it's about developing trust. It's also about a wider conversation about what we want our countryside to look like.
And is it also about the fact that we now have to think about it because we know what the consequences perhaps of not thinking about it could be?
Every summer we see storm events. Every summer we see a whole range of major challenges which farmers can provide a solution towards that. The challenge is, what does that look like economically and from a biodiversity viewpoint? But there is an opportunity to do some very clever things here in the UK, which we could then demonstrate to the world how you manage water, how you manage livestock and food production, but also how you drive biodiversity.
I love the fact that I get a chance to listen to people who know so much about so many interesting things. It's been fascinating. To the three of you at the table, thank you very, very much indeed. To Grainne, you're just back from Papua New Guinea. We appreciate it. We were sorry we couldn't bring up the South African penguins, which we know is something that you're very, very keen on. But you can tell us about that on another occasion, I do hope. Thank you for coming on the programme. Thank you to the three of you. And thank you for watching. From me, David Foster, from the team at Roundtable, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating.